Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Some of my favorite conversations about the world we live in have been on my colleague Bob Herbert's program, oped.tv. I always want to hear more, so I'm delighted that Bob accepted my invitation and is my guest today. Welcome.
Hi, Ronnie. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
I don't have to go back and say what you are. You're a columnist. You had
old stuff.
But you had over 40 years.
Well over 40 years.
Reporting, opining, doing all the different things. So what do you think about today?
Well, I mean, I never thought that I would become like the old guy that's talking about, it was so much better back in the day and stuff, when did that happen? But I do think that on a lot of fronts, not on all fronts by any means, but on a lot of fronts, I do think that we're going backwards. I think in politics, I think in terms of the economy, I think in terms of media, so we could be doing a lot better.
Do you think we're going backward, or are we just going in the wrong way?
No, I think we're going backwards. I think that we're not even like treading water. I guess I'm mixing metaphors here. Well, you can tread water. You can go backwards in the water.
Yeah, you can.
But I think that we're going backwards. If you look at the state of our politics today, before we came on the air, we were talking a little bit about newspapers, and I know that newspapers are struggling economically, but in part because of that, and in part because of other things, they're just not as good as they used to be. The quality of the coverage is not as good. If you look at TV, both the entertainment side and the public affairs side, so in many ways, I think we're not doing well.
The advertising on not only on in newspapers and magazines, it's all Google and Facebook.
Well, that's part of the big problem is that, and one of the areas where we have made terrific strides, of course, is in technology. And the internet has enormous upsides, even though it has dumbed down a lot of stuff. It has enormous upsides. I mean, I remember, and I'm sure you do too, I mean, if you wanted to do some research back in the days, if you were doing an article or a story or something like that, I mean, you had to go to these old yellowed clips and try and find what, where you had to go to the library. Now you just Google it and it pops up there in front of you. But the internet has taken all that advertising away from print publications,
from sponsoring.
So they don't have the money to pay for the news coverage that they otherwise would be doing.
So we go in a circle because some people like the Koch brothers could afford to have a newspaper, but it reinforces the kind of...
Yeah, if you're wealthy and you can have a publication and you can afford to lose the money, millions of dollars that this publication will lose, then you can continue publishing it. But if you're not, you're in trouble.
So that takes us back to the power of money. Did we ever have a time when money was as powerful as it now?
I really don't think so. I mean, people talk about the Gilded Age and, finally there's something before my time. But, what I read is that it's even, the inequities are even greater now than in the Gilded Age. But certainly, let's say since World War II, I don't think money has ever been as important or has ever been distributed in as lopsided a way as it is now. But then the other thing is that for ordinary individuals and families, it's just so difficult to get ahead because you don't get raises like you used to get in the old days. You don't get the benefits that people took for granted. People would get health coverage, they would get paid vacations, they would get pensions and that sort of thing. You don't get that now. And kids come out of school, of course, with this backbreaking debt, college debt from the loans that they had to take out to get through school. It wasn't like that in the old days. My friends, when they got out of school, you could take it easy for a while. Nobody was going to pay off loans for years and years.
When you talk about not getting the increases, not getting the benefits, it takes you back again to the rich and powerful. It's the bottom line in the corporations. It's the attitude, the whole attitude. The goal is to be rich, isn't it?
The goal is to be rich. So
and if you're rich, you must be smart.
Yeah.
That's the other part.
But the employers, the corporations, for example, the big employers, they no longer feel an obligation to look out for their workforce. A lot of it, of course, will just be superseded by technology. But there was a method to the madness of attacking unions year after year and decade after decade, because unions would look out for the interests of working people. Once the unions were weakened, and once employers could be faced with the threat of losing their jobs to technology and that sort of thing, you lose any leverage in the workplace, and it's very difficult to fight for improved wages or anything else.
You know, and the environment has all come to the upper part of the market. I was just thinking about the New York Times, the real estate section. Why do they devote it all, 25 million and 45 million dollar sales? Who's reading that section?
That's the target audience. I mean, so
what's
there
the target
are
audience?
People who have tremendous amounts of money. And for example, in a city like ours here in New York, there's an enormous number of people, not a huge percentage, but an enormous number of people with an enormous amount of wealth.
Right.
And they get to spend that money. They buy those apartments. They buy those
shoes
goods,
for $695, $700.
When I see ads in newspapers and magazines for watches that cost $300,000, it almost takes your breath away.
It's so unreal.
Yeah.
So how do we get back to some reality?
Well, I think that it requires leadership, and I think people have to understand the kind of struggle it will take and how long it will take. It would take years and years and years to get working people back onto a solid platform. I mean, if you think back, for example, to the days of big labor, when working people finally got a fair shot at what I call the American dream. But those jobs initially were terrible jobs. Those factory jobs, the mining jobs, they were dirty, they were dangerous, they paid very little, there was no job security. And the leaders of the labor movement, when they started out, much of the public and certainly the power brokers were hostile to them. They didn't get good coverage in the press. Companies could basically hire the police to fight strikers. Right. In some cases, there were very tragic battles and stuff. So it took many years to get workers onto a solid footing, and I think that something like that is required
longer
now.
than it took to get them on soft footing.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Right.
So, I mean, you had a program recently about gerrymandering and the importance of states, and in the news today it was a story about how the conservative people and Republicans are looking to change the Constitution via the states instead of the Congress. How do we change that?
Well, I think that this is such an important story, and even though it was on the front page of the Times for one day, it's probably a story that's going to remain below the radar. What happens is, I think that the conservatives who dominate the Republican Party have a much better sense of the way power works in this country than the liberals do. So in this idea of changing the Constitution, I guess if you can get 2/3 of state legislatures to agree on a specific constitutional change, you can have a constitutional convention. And what happens if you have a constitutional convention, which I think a lot of people don't realize, it's not just the very narrow, specific thing that the convention is supposed to address. It opens the door, exactly right, to any kind of tinkering with the Constitution that the folks at the convention would want to do. It's not an easy process, but it's a very dangerous process. And what makes it especially sort of harrowing at this point is because Republicans control so many of the state legislatures, so it's not beyond the pale that they might be able to get a foothold here.
Despite this election, which hopefully will make a difference.
And I think apart from a constitutional convention, which would be difficult to change the Constitution in that way, but apart from that, what has happened is that Democrats, not just liberals, but moderates, but people who either always or most of the time vote for Democrats, they turn out in presidential elections, which is why you've had 2 terms of Obama, you had 2 terms of Bill Clinton, for example. But they turn out in presidential elections. But then in those off-year elections, they lose interest and they don't turn out. And Republicans tend to make hay in those off-year elections. They get control of state legislatures, they get control of a lot of governorships, and then if it comes at a time when the census is going to be changed every 10 years, then they get to gerrymander, they get to redraw the legislative districts.
So they come back.
And they do it to their advantage, so that even if they're not getting the majority of the vote in a particular state, for example, they draw the map in such a way that they get the majority of the state legislative seats or a majority of the congressional seats and that sort of thing. And what I think of as my side of the equation, because I'm a very proud liberal, I feel like my side does not understand this well enough and does not fight hard enough in this arena.
So we had a movement with Bernie Sanders, basically, right?
Yeah.
Actually, Howard Dean, when he was the director of the Democratic National Committee, I mean, he really started with the idea that you have to have a strong party in every state.
Right.
And that, I don't think that continued, did it?
No, it didn't continue, and I actually think that Howard Dean is a better spokesperson for this sort of thing than Bernie is, for a lot of reasons. I mean, I'm crazy about Bernie. I covered him. I like a lot of his politics, not all of it. I didn't think that he was the best person
Not
to have the Democratic
some of the
nomination for president. But when he talks about a political revolution in this country, what Bernie is specifically talking about is pretty much pie in the sky. I mean, Americans don't want a political revolution. There's a lot of changes that a lot of Americans want, but they're not interested in a revolution. And I'm not sure Bernie is interested in leading a revolution. He had all that energy and all that support, especially from young people, but it looks like that's being frittered away, which I think is a shame. So we do need progressive leadership, energetic, I think younger progressive leadership in this country. Now, where that might come from, I'm not really sure, but I think that's the only way.
It reminds me of the old days in New York City, and when I was young, the reform movement within the Democratic Party. I mean, it had passion and a goal, and we knew what the goal was. It came after the Second World War.
And people were very, very smart and sophisticated, politically sophisticated, so they understood that you needed tactics and strategy, that you needed to look to the long term. You needed to understand how the legislative process works, which is often deliberately very confusing, complex and confusing, because because the people in power don't want change.
Right.
And those progressives that you're talking about in that post-World War II era, which lasted for a long time, they knew what they were doing, and I miss that.
We really did.
Yeah.
And then there was another instance in my life with Al Lowenstein.
Oh, yeah.
And that whole Dump Johnson, the anti-war kind of thing, where you had the advocates against the war, peace people, and then you had some people who saw that you needed to bring it into the political spectrum.
Yeah.
Which is what I think we need, is that the basic work of organizing and presenting goals.
And there have been two potential movements. They weren't really movements recently. One was the Occupy movement, and one is the Black Lives Matter movement. And they don't seem to have an understanding of the importance of moving into the political sphere or how to do it. And without that, you don't really get anything done. So people can talk all they want about the desire to bring about change, but if you don't know how to do it, go about it, you won't get that change.
And also to work together.
Oh, absolutely. You need allies.
Yeah.
You absolutely
need a general agenda.
Yeah.
You don't need that one specific issue.
Right.
Is that right?
No, I think that's exactly right. And that's, I go back to the term, you need a sophisticated understanding of the way, in some cases it's the political process, in some cases it's the legislative process, but the umbrella term would be you need an understanding of how power works. And I think that's lacking right now.
In 2008.
I do that all the time.
I know, God, and it seems like yesterday.
I know.
In 2008, after the Obama victory, I mean, there was great spirit in that Obama campaign. And they did try to establish something, but they never really did. They didn't continue that fervor. Right.
Right. I think it's similar to the Bernie Sanders
right.
situation,
And
where
Occupy
you have all
also,
the
you're right.
and where many very young people. They weren't all young people, but many very young people were very excited about this so-called movement that was underway. And I thought that Obama, after he became president, could have channeled those folks, those forces, and that energy. He could have put them to work as volunteers. It wouldn't have had to, cost taxpayers money. Put them to work as volunteers and say, these are some of the things that we want to achieve. Help us achieve it. We need your help. We need your assistance. And he didn't really do that. Now, I think, to be fair, Obama came in with such challenges, right? It was pretty much overwhelming. So it's hard to be too critical on that front. But it was a missed opportunity.
Do you think there's a chance he might do something like that after he gets out of office?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I have no idea.
I mean, he's a community
I have
organizer.
no idea
Wouldn't that
what
be a
he's
great
doing.
idea?
Well, was he ever really a community
I don't know.
organizer?
He said he was.
Obama was pretty much. And I covered him out in Illinois when he was running for the
right.
U.S. Senate and stuff. And he was pretty much always a politician. I mean, even when he was up at Harvard, where he had a distinguished career at Harvard, as opposed to what the Republicans would like to say, show us the transcripts and stuff like that. But he was, one of the reasons he was so successful on campus is that he was able to bring people together and work collectively as
But there's no reason.
has a great
somebody's
understanding of power.
If he's a good politician,
Right.
maybe he will.
Well, I think we have a need for really
right.
good politicians. I just don't think
Exactly.
that he was a real
Right.
community organizer.
But in your memory, I mean, have you ever known of a majority leader of the Senate or the Speaker of the House saying we will not work with this
Oh,
president?
I think that it's been outrageous. I remember early on, I was critical of some of the policies, decisions that Obama made. I wanted him to do more earlier about jobs. I wanted him to do something more about infrastructure. I was against the surge in Afghanistan under Obama. But the idea of the way he was treated by the Republican Party is so scandalous, so outrageous, so racist, that it was just disgusting. And you're right, Mitch McConnell said at the outset that their goal was to have his presidency fail.
One term,
And what does that say about this high elected official? What does that say about his and his followers' support for the interests of the country, not the party or the hostility to the Democratic Party? What does it say about their patriotism and wanting what's best for the United States?
We know that, I think it would be certain, they would never do that with a white man.
Oh, there's no chance.
Person.
I don't believe that for a moment.
Right.
And people say, well, they impeached Bill Clinton, but that was a completely different set of circumstances. They did not treat Bill Clinton with the same level of outrageous hostility that they've treated Barack Obama. Absolute contempt. When that fella screamed out,
you lie.
Right.
Wasn't that
at the State of the Union? Oh my goodness.
It's terrible. I actually think that, we've criticized Obama a little bit, but he has been some very good president.
I think that he has been a good president, and I put that in the context of the enormous challenges that he faced. We were we were on the verge of going into another Great Depression. He fended that off. He saved the automobile industry. You have this Republican saying, let the American automobile industry go down. Are you kidding? That was bizarre. He saved the automobile industry. I thought that it was important, not just important, essential, to bail out the banks. I didn't like exactly the way that it was done. I thought that we could have gotten more in return. We should have gotten more for ordinary people in return. But you couldn't just let the banking industry in the United States collapse. And then he's been, the way he has conducted himself
so elegant.
as president. Yeah, the sense
He is
of
the most
dignity,
elegant.
which is
Yes.
so important.
Unbelievable.
Right. I mean, you're the head of state, and you need to conduct yourself in that way.
Right.
So,
I
all
don't
in all,
remember anybody.
I think he
I mean,
has
I grew
been a
up
good
with
president.
FDR, so
Yeah.
that was a pretty, kind of important place for a person. But I think since him, there's nobody who's as statesman.
I agree, and I think that things really started to go haywire, just in terms of behavior, not policy, with Richard Nixon, and then after that we've had some bizarre instances.
We have so much to talk about, so I'm just wanting to go. Regan. They always talk about Reagan as the great communicator. I mean, he never communicated with me, but when we think back, it was the deregulation, wasn't it, that started us so badly?
Yeah, I mean, the idea that Reagan is a hero in this country to me or to so many people in this country, to me, is bizarre. I mean, he got us on this road to extreme wealth and income inequality. He was the one who was the architect of these tremendous tax cuts for the rich, even though they don't like to say that he was causing such deficits that he had to turn around and subsequently raise taxes as well. I mean,
and breaking up the union.
I just think that it was bizarre. I mean, his was an administration that was relentlessly hostile to the interests of working people in the United States.
And then Bill Clinton contributed because he moved the Democratic Party more towards the Reagan thing. Yeah, right?
It was deregulation on steroids under Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton pushed deregulation to the max. He took the Republican idea for NAFTA and went to the mat on these trade agreements that were bizarre trade agreements. He got rid of welfare, that famous phrase, we're going to get rid of welfare as we know it, so that when we had the Great Recession, this terrible economic crisis, you didn't have, for folks who desperately needed it, you didn't have the benefits of the welfare system to sort of bolster them in their time of need. I mean, there were a lot of problems with the Bill Clinton
So now we come to we've almost finished this program and we haven't talked about this election. I know, we're going to have to do it again because we're having fun. Donald Trump and the most recent diatribe to the African American community.
What do you have to lose?
Oh, what is he saying?
You walk down the street, you get shot. Excuse me? It's horrifying.
Yeah.
But of course,
racism.
He's playing to these white nationalist organizations. This fellow from Breitbart that he's put basically in charge of his campaign. It's really horrifying. But to me, the fundamental thing about Donald Trump is that he is just so clearly, basically unqualified to be president of the United States. He doesn't know how to be president. He doesn't understand the issues. He's demonstrated no desire to learn about the issues. This was a guy who didn't understand the nuclear triad. He doesn't understand how we deliver nuclear weapons in this country. It's bizarre. And the idea that there are so many people willing to vote for this guy for president is just, I mean, it almost makes you despondent.
It does. And also the fact that he's covered so much. I mean, it's a trap that we have to fall into, I guess. How can you not cover this man in the media or something, right? But each time you do, you're helping him.
Right, exactly. Well, we cover him, but I think that we don't cover him properly. I mean, you don't lose your objectivity by making it clear in the press, in print, and on television that this guy has no clue about what he's talking about.
Right. So if you advertise that he's making a major address, he doesn't make a major address. They're all nonsense.
He doesn't know enough to make a major address.
Right.
He doesn't know how to speak to his audience, which is why he's now been almost forced by his handlers to read from a teleprompter. It's really strange.
Yeah. Now, what are we going to do with our Democratic candidate?
It's tough. Hillary Clinton is not a good candidate. If the Democrats had a good candidate who was also a good politician, he or she would be running away with this race, with this election. But that is not happening. There are real problems. I think that the email scandal is overblown, but she has handled it so poorly
that it keeps
it keeps going and
Right.
going and going. But a more serious issue she's got to confront between now and Election Day is the Clinton Foundation and the idea of
and that's just really been
access.
started to be talked about.
Yeah. And I just think that both of the Clintons, there was a time when it was believed that one of her biggest assets was the idea that she would have Bill Clinton as a political advisor. It turns out that maybe this is not an asset at all, but a net big liability.
So what are we going to do?
Well, I think that,
We're going to vote
I think
for
you have
her.
no choice. Trump cannot be allowed to become president of the United States. So there's an obligation here, thinking in terms of the best interests of the country as a whole, to make sure that Trump does not become president. And the only way to do that is to vote for Hillary Clinton. So I think that there's really no choice there. But then we need to assume Hillary wins.
Yeah.
We need a serious assessment of what's gone haywire with our politics.
Right. I was thinking if Trump got elected, that would really bring Bernie's revolution to the fore.
Well, I don't think that it would be Bernie's revolution. I think that what would happen is that Trump, I think, would be catastrophic, and we'd be trying to put out all those fires.
To get rid of him or something. Yeah, it would. So we have got to talk more about this.
I'd love to.
All right. So either on your program or mine.
One or the other, or maybe both.
Thank you. Thank you
so
very
much,
much, Bob. If there are any people you'd like to hear or topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.